I don't know, doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to go with what I think he was arguing, which seems coherent, was that it pertains to the divine nature, but it is not the divine nature in terms of its attributes themselves, which were given off or whatever.
So what is it?
But it is the divine privileges, which seems to be referring to these things which God is owed by virtue of his divine nature and attributes. So they're not the same thing. So it's divine, and this is, by the way, I'm not asserting this, right? I'm hypothesizing, just to clarify. So it would be the divine nature and his attributes are one thing, and the divine privileges are the things to which God is owed by virtue of his divine nature and attributes. And the idea is that Jesus...
I'm talking about the necessary attributes were not given up. It was the acquired attributes which were given up. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
What are you
saying? That the privileges which are owed to God by virtue of him having...
Give me an example so I can understand. Give me something specific. Which privilege which is divine that he gave up?
I think maybe something like obedience or worship. That kind of thing.
Knowledge, sorry, obedience or worship?
Obedience and worship.
Okay, you know, I asked him this specifically whether someone worthy of worship, is that a necessary attribute of his?
Yeah, that's one thing I'm not sure
So it cannot be worship?
No, I don't know, as in I'm not sure I fully understood.
And you know what worship entails? Glory.
Like quickly.
So he must have given up his glory.
That point you were making earlier, I'm not sure I understood or necessarily agreed with Josh there. Just because perhaps we understood the ideas of worship differently, but I kind of seem to understand that worship seems to be more of an acquired, if we're going to call it property, it seems to be more of an acquired property because you would require agents to worship you, right? As in, when we talk about worship...
So you're saying God is not worthy of worship unless someone worships him? In other words, that's what you're saying?
No, this is the thing, so this is where it gets confusing.
Exactly.
No, as in, I'm saying...
But that's what it entails in this...
Can I explain something? The point is that I'm unsure. There's two different ways of kind of understanding this, right? I'm saying that God is intrinsically worthy of worship in that his worthy of worshipness, if we can call that a property, is always there because he's always perfectly good and he's always divine, all that kind of stuff, right? That's one thing. But when we're talking about worship as an ability, something that can actually be performed, that requires the contingent humans being actualized, and therefore it would be an acquired property. So it just depends which way we're understanding it.
No, when you say intrinsic property of his, he has this divine privilege of being worshipped. Yes? In order for an agent to worship him, he should first have this ability to be, he should have this intrinsic nature of being worthy of worship. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So an agent cannot worship someone, for example, this tree, unless that tree is worthy of worship. And by the way, you'll be surprised, there are some certain religions who do that.
Yeah, they cannot justify everything.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is that for an entity to be worshipped, it has to be worthy of worship.
Yeah.
See what I mean? So this is an intrinsic nature of God. That means, is it a necessary attribute of God, or is it an acquired attribute of God?
Okay, so this is what I'm saying. I'm saying, first of all, I don't think being worthy of worship is necessarily a property. In the sense that we might disagree on this, but I think...
you think it's acquired? Until someone worships him, you're not worthy of worship?
Not even an acquired acquisition point, just before we get onto that.
Isn't that part of the definition of God?
No.
Being which is worthy of worship?
I'm not sure. I think perhaps I think you could say that, and it would be true, but I think it's not the most basic or fundamental way of explaining it. So I say...
Who's defining...
Wait, can I just quickly deal with it? Okay,
it's interesting all the time.
When we say worthy of worship, that's predicated on the nature of who God is. He's worthy to worship because who God is worthy of worship, right? And therefore I'm saying it's more fundamental to say who is God? God is omnipotent, omniscient, right? And that's
uncaused and independent. Why remove them? Because you know it doesn't work with your beliefs.
Anyway, my point is that I think it's more accurate and fundamental to say these are God's properties rather than saying worthy of worship is a property.
I think
you could say it, but I just don't think it's accurate.
Listen, if someone is omnipotent, then automatically that person is worthy of worship. You cannot have it any other way. It has to be. It is a necessary, interpretation of an omnipotent God. When a God is omnipotent, he is automatically worthy of worship. But if someone empties himself of that nature of omnipotence, of that nature of being worthy of worship, of his glory even, yes, then that is not God Almighty we're talking about. We're talking about something else.
Okay, I need to do it.
And that is where Philippians 2:6 is actually an argument against Trinitarians rather than 4 Trinitarians. And this is where I say,
I need to go.
Alhamdulillah ala ni'mat al-Islam.
I need to go. It's been nice. It's been nice talking to you, Luca.
Being Muslims, for
nice talking to you.
Islam as a religion.
I have to go. It's been nice talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I mean, we only ask you to, as you're investigating and researching, research more. Think about the maximally perfect being, who is really worthy of putting God and worthy of worship. Islam provides an alternative model, and I explained to you in Surah Al-Ikhlas, gives you that model in which it actually fundamentally and totally goes against the belief that Christians are coming up with. In fact, it may be actually engaging with the Christians, I may say so, where it is saying God is not something that he begets or he is begotten himself, but uniquely independent. He's totally unique and unlike another. And importantly, he is self-sufficient. We consider, if you think it's not something, easily understandable, as an intuitive way, that a being worthy of worship needs to be self-sufficient, then, I don't know why, even you have all these formulations of, from philosophers. Maybe the Christian doctrinal bias is making them to formulate again and again these kind of doctrines of God the Father is necessarily someone who begets or someone who precedes the Son, and so on and so forth. It's just to get away from the difficulty of what the Trinity entails, more than one God or partialism.
Can I quickly just say, one point is, I'd say, please also likewise look and understand contemporary and, see, I'm not saying it just has to be contemporary, but what is the foremost scholarship on philosophers of religion, right? And if they're Christian, I understand that you're saying, that they're biased and so on and so forth, but as in, it's not really fair to say, just because they're Christian, I'm going to dismiss their points and not look at them intrinsically. I'm saying there's a reason why they are at the top of their fields respectively.
They're coming up from a tradition of all of this argumentation, from a Christian baggage.
Wait. You need to give them their due and deal with their arguments intrinsically rather than just saying, okay, because they're Christian, I'm going to dismiss them. Anyhow, also I just want to make a general point. We disagree vehemently, but more just a general point about speakers called a dialogue. We don't have to hate each other or anything. We can intellectually disagree, and passionately so, but we don't have to harbour any ill will against each other. And that's just the way we need to move forward with a lot of these debates and discussions. Absolutely.
And have you experienced that here?
Well, as in intellectual.
Did you feel hatred?
No, I don't feel hatred. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying a general point. Moving forward, we need more intellectual disagreement.
More productive discussions, dialogue.
And that's just going to be something.
I totally agree. Thanks for your time, Deepak.
I agree. Take care until you talk next time.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Give it tea.
How long is it?
More than 2 hours.
Oh, that's too long.
Thank you.
I didn't take it because of that.
3 hours. 3 hours, 11 minutes.
Can you take everything? I can't even see.
Yeah, good.